Under this president, the federal government continues to pressure local law enforcement to help with the deportation of millions of people. This is having a chilling effect on immigrant communities here in California. Research shows that fear of local law enforcement cooperation with deportation makes it less likely that victims of crime will come forward. In fact, undocumented people and their families are less likely to call the police because they fear that a family member will be deported. Today, we are going to hear from lawmakers, advocates, and survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault about why California should pass the California Values Act, SB 54, to make sure that all crime victims and witnesses feel safe to come forward and to keep California safe for all communities. Our first speaker today is Assemblymember David Chiu.
Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is David Chiu. I represent San Francisco in the California State Assembly, and I'm a proud co-author of the Values Act of SB 54. I want to first start by thanking the ACLU, the Partnership to End Domestic Violence, and all of the advocates around the state of California who know how important our immigrants are to our community. It goes without saying that our country, our state, our cities would not be where they are today without the contributions, the energies, the vision of our immigrant communities. But unfortunately, during this time of history, we have a president who has declared war on our immigrant communities. He's issued 2 unconstitutional executive orders attacking our immigrant communities. He has proposed 10,000 new ICE agents to fan out across the country and into our state to arrest, detain, and deport our immigrant communities. One of the most pernicious policies that his administration is trying to pursue is the suggestion that our local law enforcement agents should be helping to deport millions of Californians. I can tell you as a former criminal prosecutor how important it is that we build trust with our immigrant communities. With so many of our residents from immigrant backgrounds, when members of local law enforcement from our police, from our district attorney's office, from our sheriff's departments don't have the trust of our immigrant communities, we cannot fight crime. This year, immigration arrests have increased more than 40% compared to 2016. ICE agents are knocking on doors, identifying themselves as police, and our immigrant communities are understandably fearful. The Los Angeles Police Department's Police Chief Beck reported that in 2017, we've seen a dramatic drop from the Latino community of those who are reporting sexual assault cases, a 25% drop. Those who are reporting domestic violence cases, a 10% drop. Entangling our local law enforcement in the deportation process puts more victims and more witnesses at risk and further undermines community trust. The California Values Act, among other things, will ensure that our state resources and our local resources are focused on doing what we need them to do, on building trust and ensuring the safety of our communities. Making sure that our schools, our hospitals, our courthouses, our libraries are safe spaces for everyone in our communities. We need to stand up for the values of California. We need to stand up for our immigrant communities, and this is why it's so incredibly important that we pass SB 54. Again, I want to thank everyone who's coming together for this. This is about our values. This is about our state, and we look forward to moving this important bill forward.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Assemblymember Eloise Reyes.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here. SB 54 is not anti-law enforcement. It is pro-community safety. It is so important that we provide the safe haven for our community so that they can feel that they can report. This issue of underreporting is a serious issue, and we have to be concerned about that. As a result of what we are seeing, I did introduce Assembly Bill 578, Immigrant Protection, the Immigrant Protection Act, which provides protection for our immigrants so that they can report when they are witnesses or victims of a violent attack. I have also introduced AB 1268, which creates a domestic violence and sexual prevention fund. As a proud co-author of SB 54, it's my duty to go back to the community and to make sure that the community is not getting information that is incorrect. For organizations that advocate for providing aid to victims and increasing prevention efforts, your work has been very important. For those who have been victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, your voices have never been more important. Your courage encourages others to speak up and to be advocates. As mentioned earlier, I am a proud co-author of SB 54, which was introduced by Senate Pro Tem Kevin De Leon. And as I indicated earlier, it's to help ensure that our communities are safe for all people. Before I go into depth on the legislation that I authored, I also want to recognize the current climate we are in and what makes it so critical that we come together on issues of immigration and violence prevention. The rhetoric currently being used in Washington is a result of fear, hate, and bigotry. Contrary to claims made by Donald Trump, his threats of mass deportation have had a negative effect on our communities. This rhetoric has led to the underreporting, as mentioned earlier, of serious crimes from witnesses and victims of criminal activity who are unsure if cooperation with law enforcement will lead to detention and deportation. SB 54 is a pro-public safety bill. We need our limited public safety resources used to make our communities safe, not to be used to backfill the resources of ICE or any other federal agency. An article in the Los Angeles Times elaborated on how fewer Latinos are reporting crimes of sexual assaults due to the fear and distrust of law enforcement. That's not the society I want to live in. And that is why, as mentioned earlier, I did introduce AB 578, which increases the punishment for the crime of witness intimidation when it is committed by threats to report the immigration status or perceived immigration status of a victim, a witness, a family member, or a victim or witness. We must let perpetrators know that any type of intimidation, especially regarding deportation threats, will not be tolerated. Some of the crimes have been the most underreported have been the crimes and cases of domestic and sexual violence, as was mentioned by my partner from ACLU. This issue is not a new one, as approximately 40% of California women experience physical, intimate partner violence in their lifetimes, and 20% of women will be a victim of sexual assault. AB 1268, mentioned earlier, creates a domestic violence and sexual assault prevention fund. The fund's purpose is to support innovative prevention strategies that incorporate cross-movement collaborations and community-informed approaches to address these very serious issues. Again, I want to thank you. I want to thank the partners who are advocating and being the voice for the many victims that couldn't be here today. Together, we can create a better California where our children and families can live free from violence and intimidation. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to continue to support the California Values Act, SB 54. Thank you.
Advocates and survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking have traveled here to Sacramento to lobby legislators to pass SB 54, the California's Values Act. We will hear from 3 of those people now. Kathy Moore is the Executive Director of the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence, one of the co-sponsors of today's Lobby Day.
Good morning. Again, my name is Kathy Moore. I'm the Executive Director of the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence, representing over 1,000 survivors, advocates, organizations, and allied groups throughout the state. I'm here to show our strong support for SB 54, the California Values Act. We in the domestic violence community know that as the Trump administration turns up the dial on anti-immigration policies and encourages more entanglement between ICE and local law enforcement, this leaves many immigrant domestic violence victims fearful that the very systems designed to support them will actually put them in greater danger. A case in point, one of our member programs shared this recent experience. They told us that we have a client in shelter right now who was interviewed by police, and despite severe violence, she denied all of her partner's abuse because she was afraid to have the police involved in her family's life. This victim was scared that telling the truth about the abuse she suffered would lead to family members being deported. Unfortunately, this victim has heard about increased ICE activity and heightened vulnerability when people seek help. What's even more tragic is that had she felt safe coming forward, as a crime victim, she may have actually been eligible for protections and immigration relief. But this story is not unique. We have documented similar stories up and down the state, and the data bears this out. You've seen reference to the recent data from the Los Angeles Police Department. And we also have evidence through a recent study that revealed that 78% of advocates and attorneys who responded to a national survey reported that they've been working with immigrant victims who are expressing fears about contacting police. So we here in California cannot remain silent when abusive partners use the threat of calling ICE as a means of controlling their victims. We cannot stand by while children in this state are suffering, traumatized when their parent reaches out for help, only to be taken into ICE custody, leaving the children afraid at home and with an abusive parent. And we cannot helplessly shrug our shoulders when immigrant victims' options for seeking safety are limited by these very real fears of detention and deportation. We must act. Instead of silence, we choose to raise our voices and demand that immigrant victims of domestic violence are protected in California, and to advocate ardently to ensure that our schools, hospitals, courthouses, and law enforcement offices are all safe havens for these victims. People experiencing domestic violence must be able to reach out for help from the myriad of agencies that are designed to help keep our families and our communities safe. We need local law enforcement and public resources focused on doing their jobs, not the federal government's. And an essential part of doing that job effectively involves cultivating community trust so that victims and witnesses do feel safe coming forward. In fact, evidence, I think we've talked about it, evidence has been reported by the University of California, San Diego, indicates that counties that actually disentangle themselves from ICE had fewer crimes compared to other ICE-compliant counties. So domestic violence victims in California need to be able to trust that they won't be hauled away if they call 911 and police arrive on the scene. Victims need to be able to trust that they won't be detained if they go to the courthouse for an emergency restraining order. And injured victims need to be confident that if they go to a hospital to seek urgent medical attention, they won't be detained by ICE on the way out the door. So on behalf of our member programs across the state, we at the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence are taking action to increase safety by advocating for SB 54, which strengthens essential community trust. We urge California's legislature to act as well. We hope they'll support victim safety and that the Assembly Appropriations Committee and then the full Assembly vote in favor of SB 54. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Fung Tao McLeod, a survivor of domestic violence and sexual assault.
Good morning. My name is Fung Tao McLeod. I'm an immigrant, a naturalized U.S. citizen, and a survivor. Today, I'm here to support the California Values Act, SB 54, because I believe justice should be available to everyone, regardless of their immigration status. When people are afraid to come forward and report crimes or come to court, it undermines our justice system and makes us all less safe. For those in danger, there's often a real fear of coming forward. I understand the fear of coming forward. As a child, I was raised in an abusive home. At the age of 10, my younger sister and I were belted. I heard her screams and tried to stop her dad from further abusing her. I remember hearing my teacher's voice. If someone is hurt or needs help, call 911. So I did. 2 officers arrived and evaluated our condition. One officer said to my stepdad, "Next time, use your hands." Since that day, I lost trust in law enforcement, but it doesn't have to be that way. We can focus on policies that builds trust, which is what SB 54 does. At the age of 17, I began experiencing adolescent dating abuse. I was physically, emotionally, and sexually abused to the point where I was threatened with death if I were to call 911. When I reached out to my ex-abuser's parents and my parents for help, his mother blamed me for making him angry. And my stepdad blames me for the abuse because I didn't go to church every Sunday. Yet my experience is far from unique. As an elementary school student, abuse and violence were normalized amongst my peers. During recess, while the other kids were competing over who wore the best shoes, who had the rarest Pokemon cards, fellow classmates and I played a game we labeled called Who Got the Worst Beating. Over the last 2 years, I've publicly shared my personal experiences with local schools, colleagues, and acquaintances to fight the normalization of violence. Sadly, feedback I've received includes fear of coming forward to seek help, even to those whom victims know personally, because there's a risk of being judged or blamed, just like I was. This year, multiple people shared their fears of reporting or filing a domestic violence restraining order because their abuser would threaten either deportation or child custody rights if they were to seek help, specifically because the victim lacked legal status. That fear can be paralyzing. When individuals feel safe and secure and being heard without fear of retaliation, they are far more willing to come forward and identify crimes against themselves and against others. This is a time to come together in solidarity. We must pass the California Values Act, SB 54, now to make sure crime victims, survivors, and witnesses are not afraid to come forward and seek help regardless of immigration status. Thank you.
I hope we can all thank Fung for her brave words. It is very difficult for a survivor to share their story like that, and that voice is incredibly important. We have other advocates here today from CalCASA, the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and the Family Violence Law Center, and we will hear from one more advocate, Bridget Guerra, from Empower YOLO.
Good morning, my name is Bridget Guerra and I represent the nonprofit Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Center Empower YOLO, serving Yolo County as well as the entire rest of the Sacramento region. So I was here today to talk about my experience with working with immigrant survivors and the current heightened fear of immigration issues, deportation actions that we see on a daily basis today. The clients that I work with, immigrant survivors, primarily within the Hispanic community, have expressed time and time again fear about deportation, immigration concerns, and whether they would report to law enforcement or, in what I focus on, pursuing a domestic violence restraining order in our county courthouses. They've asked me time and time again whether ICE will be standing outside the courthouse waiting for them, whether their local law enforcement will report them to ICE if they chose to pursue reporting a crime of domestic violence, sexual assault, sex, human trafficking, what have you. I've had to reassure them time and time again that immigration will not be involved if they chose to report a crime, or that there would be no consequence against them if they chose to report a crime. And yet I cannot put their fears to rest because of the apparent news media that they continually see on a daily basis. They do have reasonable fear, and it is a huge obstacle, it is a huge burden for our nonprofit to pursue our mission in helping victims of domestic violence and sexual assault when victims are choosing not to come forward. I ask for the support of this bill. We support this bill, and I ask for the passing of this bill. Otherwise, we will continue to see the obstacles that I see on a daily basis with immigrant survivors in reporting, and it will only continue the cycle of violence and perpetration that we are there to stop and prevent. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our formal presentation. We have additional survivors here in the room, and all of our speakers and other advocates are available to answer questions and for individual interviews. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you to all of our speakers.